In TF2, there's generally a system of somewhat recently established, but largely agreed upon rules for weapon design. If a weapon gives you some kind of benefit, especially one that makes you harder to kill like health regen, a speed boost, or an extra jump, you need to have the weapon out in order to gain these effects so that the enemy can see what you're working with and react accordingly. Unlocks are generally to be seen as side grades that don't overshadow their stock counterparts. But melee weapons are not always subjected to this, except in fringe circumstances. Like, yes, the power jack is better than the stock fire axe in basically every situation, but it does still technically have a downside. And full stuns are generally seen as bullshit poo-poo garbage that never should have been in the game to begin with. So, with all that being said, what the hell is this? I got him! I got him! Fuck you! The Holiday Punch still manages to get away with what the Sandman got gutted for, and arguably to a much worse degree. I mean, hell, at least the Sandman still let you move if you got hit by the ball from anything besides moonshot range. And hey, the ability for the Sandman ball to stun ubered players got removed pretty early on in the weapon's lifespan. But that's not the case for the funny Tickle Mittens. Not to mention, unless you happen to random crit a building, there's pretty much no downsides for using the Holiday Punch compared to the stock fists. So what gives? Why do these funny winter mittens get away with breaking the rules? Well, it all comes down to context, so let's talk about that. Now, the Holiday Punch is super simple. We don't have to dig in too far with the stat breakdown thing. They're identical to the stock fists, except that critical hits will deal a non-damaging tickle on the enemy, forcing them into a laugh taunt state identical to the Schadenfreude, and attacking them from behind guarantees a crit, as well as attacking another enemy heavy who's holding out the Holiday Punch, whether you're behind him or not. That's it, that's the whole weapon. But the most important part is that the tickle function effectively acts as a stun against anyone you manage to crit. Now, I've made my position on stuns very, very, very clear. Stun mechanics, or really any kind of nullification mechanics, are just so bad, but the Holiday Punch tends to fly under people's bullshit radar. And not just because people tend not to use it outside of role-playing as a mall Santa who's not allowed to let the kids sit on his lap anymore, or being a friendly hoovie. So why is this? I mean, this is objectively the worst stun lock state you can possibly be in, and it can be applied over and over again, especially if the heavy keeps getting random crits, which are especially common on melee weapons anyway. Well, part of the reason is that you have to consider what the heavy is giving up when he normally gets a crit. If a heavy chooses to engage you in a fist fight, if he gets a random crit on you, then in the majority of situations, that's just going to kill you. That's worse than getting stunned, because unless the heavy uses the stun state to mow you down with his minigun, he's leaving your fate up to an often frustratingly inconsistent taunt kill. And both the taunt kill and minigun take time to set up, meaning unlike a random crit, there's no instant gratification. And speaking of the minigun, that's another thing. I've mentioned this before, but Heavy's melee weapons are so difficult to get use out of in close range, even with the sheer volume of random crits you'll get in casual servers, and a big part of the reason why is that at melee range, even miniguns with damage penalties like the Natasha and the Heater will shred through just about anyone except maybe another Heavy. And they'll do it far more reliably too. So by choosing to use the Holiday Punch, you're definitely trying to get some stuns, but in order to do so, you have to go way outside of your class's comfort zone and effectively gimp yourself for the opportunity. Compare this to the old Sandman. All you had to do was bonk someone with a ball from nearly any range for largely the same effect. It didn't hinder your movement, and you only had to switch away from your primary for a short second, so you didn't have to change a thing about how you played Scout to get a massive benefit out of it. And the only thing you sacrificed was a bit of survivability that you don't need in the first place if an enemy is incapable of attacking you before you even engage them. Or the Scorch Shot, where all you have to give up for your flare to completely stun someone from any range 16 times in a row is 10 damage. Unless the flare hits them twice, then you have to give up around negative 16 damage. This gives the Holiday Punch a sense of risk versus reward that's actually very balanced, despite the end result being something that's generally seen as unfun to fight. Not to mention, the fact that you need to get behind enemies as a heavy as they're unaware of you is not only incredibly difficult since heavy isn't designed to be a flanker, but it's also an optimal situation for some minigun destruction that you're choosing to use a melee in instead. Now, in some situations, this is actually going to be the optimal play. If you're sneaking up on a medic with his uber charge ready, then getting a tickly backstab will prevent him from popping and potentially save the match. But again, a crit from your other melees would do the same thing. Except for the eviction notice, obviously, but we don't need to talk about that. But the point is, getting a random melee crit in this same situation would just straight up kill the medic, while the Holiday Punch leaves the whole thing a lot more open to chance. Where the Holiday Punch gets a massive advantage here over the other fist weapons is that it has guaranteed crits from behind, while unless you get a kill with the KGB, you're not going to get guaranteed crits on the other heavy melees at all. But now it's up to you to follow up on it, which isn't always going to be an option in the heat of the moment due to how long it takes to either get the taunt kill, wind up your minigun, or just fucking punch the guy to death. And if that's what you choose to do, then your own random crits can screw you over by doing no damage while he's laughing. And since this whole weapon does encourage such a flank heavy playstyle, it means you're going to be on your own for most of these exchanges, and it'll be difficult for your teammates to take advantage of the short stun as a support mechanic. So basically, instead of having a stun mechanic be a reward for one of the strongest classes in the game in order to make him even stronger at very little practical cost, the Holiday Punch makes a similar stun a reward for one of the weaker classes in the game, who can only get this benefit by playing far outside of his comfort zone, and the stun is an equivalent reward, if not usually worse off, than getting a normal critical hit with almost all of his other melee weapons. So in other words, the Holiday Punch gets away with its main gimmick being a stun lock, primarily because the vast majority of the time, it's just the stock fists. And when it isn't the stock fists, it's debatable on whether or not it should be in order to be the most effective. But even then, unlike the Sandman, there's counterplay to this. I know I said earlier that the Holiday Punch didn't really have downsides compared to the stock fists, but I was sort of lying about that. On paper, sure, there's not really a downside, but in practice, yeah, there's absolutely counterplay. The absolute best thing you can do against a Holiday Punch heavy, at least to avoid getting hit by a random crit from him, is to jump while fighting him, since you can't enter a laugh state while you're jumping. Meaning he wastes his crits, which now do no damage, while you're still able to fight him. I can't tell if this is a complete coincidence since you can't taunt while jumping in the first place, or else actually an intentionally genius way of ensuring that even this doofy-ass meme weapon has counterplay so you don't need to get stunned by it. The funny thing is, this actually gives you way more options for counterplay than you would normally have against actually damaging random crits. Ultimately, I think what it all comes down to at the end of the day is that the main reason the Holiday Punch gets away with being entirely based around a stun is that it's just funny. I mean, it forces you to laugh. How could it not be funny? Like, here comes this giant bear of a man who, in the middle of a firefight, elects to tickle you into a fit of uncontrollable laughter and then hit you with the old Pootis Pow to finish you off. That's what we call a funny stunny. No one calls it that. I'm going to kill myself. So what's the moral of this story? Probably that stun mechanics should never have long range attached to them, and if you do include them, they should be sacrificing something equivalently powerful so that you don't feel like you're getting fucked over. Also, if you make your weapon design and strategy funny, that softens people's opinions on how fun it is to fight. And if you play your cards just right, and have Santa Claus himself smile down upon you, you can design a TF2 weapon based around a stun mechanic that's not only universally accepted by the casual side, but not banned in any competitive format either. I think the existence of the Holiday Punch is honestly kind of a Christmas miracle. It just screams old school TF2 design, and unlike that other stunning weapon of heavies, it's surprisingly balanced and not infuriating to fight against. Unless maybe you're a medic player in the middle of your Uber charge, but if you were using the vaccinator, then you kind of deserve to have at least some Christmas cheer forcefully shoved up your ass. Hope I took Whatville off the queue. Now, why would I do that? Why would I do that, Faker?